Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around we're back on Noel programming, and after I saw The Flash last week I got on a little bit of a DC rabbit hole and decided that this week we're going to look at the first big screen live action Superman movies, which weren't shown in one part. In fact, they were shown in 15 parts. They were both movie serials made by Sam Katzman for Columbia Pictures. In 1948 we had Superman. In 1950 we had Atom Man vs. Superman. And I've got the box set of it, and I've got to make sure that doesn't reflect too much in the light. So I've got the box set of both of these with a whole bunch of extras, and they are wild fun. Of course, these weren't the first time that Superman appeared on the big screen. That would be the Max Fleischer Superman movies, which have just been released on Blu-ray. And I'm getting a copy of those in a few days, so I may well review those, at least partly. They were beautifully animated. They were wonderful bits of nostalgia when they came out on physical media, and they're incredibly rewatchable. And movie serials with superheroes weren't new either. There'd been a Captain America one. There was also a Captain Marvel one previously. But Superman was crazily popular. The serials I'm going to talk about were not based directly on the Superman comic books. They were based on the radio serials based on the Superman comic books, which were incredibly popular all over the world. In fact, they were popular here in Australia, but because they couldn't get the recordings of the American radio shows over here, instead they brought the scripts over, and the scripts were then voiced by Australian actors. So we had Leonard Teal playing Superman.
I have no name. I come from a world that no longer exists. Here in this world of yours, men would call me a Superman.
That's basically what these serials were based on. So there's the inside covers just to show you the nice presentation we've got. And there's what they look at on the inside. There are a few extras as well. Movie serials I like. I think movie serials are an interesting concept because they were the way to get bums on seats in cinemas every week. They'd show the first episode on a matinee, and a kid who wanted to see all of the Superman serials had to keep going to the cinema every week for 15 weeks. It was an enormous cash cow for Columbia Pictures, and the first one was done really on the cheap. Yet, there's still some interesting things about it. Of course, Superman is played by Kirk, a guy who started out in vaudeville and on Broadway as a dancer. He was in Hell's a Poppin' on stage and a bunch of other things. So he was a dancer more than he was an actor. And so he got cast by Sam Katzman, mostly because of his athleticism. He was 37 years old at the time. He was a great dancer. He could move well. He was athletic and quite strong and physically fit. So he got cast as Superman, and his Superman is interesting. He's a tall, good-looking guy. I'm not sure he was the best actor in the world, but he did enough to put the story across. The Lois Lane we get is the favourite Lois Lane of everybody, which is Neill. She is the definitive Lois Lane for me, as George Reeves is the definitive Superman for me. She did both of these serials playing Lois Lane, and she grew in the role as well. Her Lois Lane was ambitious. She would go out and get a story. She was tough, and she was a woman working in a man's world in newspapers, and yet held her own. She wasn't a shrinking violet in any way, and that makes it play quite well to a modern audience. A guy called Tommy Bond plays Jimmy Olsen in these two movies, and he's quite good as well. He started out doing the Our Gang comedies in the 1930s. He grew up, he went to World War II, he came back, became a character actor for a little while doing things like this, where he does quite a scrappy Jimmy Olsen, and he's quite good in the role. Then in the 1960s, he was a production manager on a whole bunch of different TV series, including Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. So he's gone from playing like second fiddle to Superman to playing second fiddle to Morgul the Friendly Drelb. I'm quite impressed with these movie serials. Watching them all in a row is, to be honest with you, a little bit tiresome. All of the musical stings get very repetitive when you do that, and the recaps at the beginning of each episode get a little tiresome as well. But having said that, if you watched, say, 4 episodes in a row, which would take you a little over an hour because they run about 15 to 17 minutes each, do them in 3 or 4 chunks, and then just enjoy the serials and anticipate what's happening next and watch them. But I watched both of them in 2.5 hour runs, which is roughly the time it takes for the serials to run. And it did get a bit tiring. There are kind of slightly repetitive use of special effects at times, but the audience at the time wouldn't have known that because they were watching it every week. Nonetheless, the first episode of Superman, the 1948 serial, impressed the hell out of me because it's telling the origin story of Superman. It tells you about Krypton. It tells you about Jor-El going up to the council saying, hey, the planet's going to blow up, we've got to do something. And the council mocking him. And so he takes his prototype rocket, sticks the baby in it, and yeets it off the planet, sending it to Earth while Krypton, he and his wife Lara die. And for a small budget movie, it does it quite well. It does use some stock footage of disaster stuff filmed for other movies. The costumes are quite good. The script is serviceably good. The rocket is quite cute. I like the little kind of chode of a rocket that they have for Kal-El to travel to Earth in. And telling that story very, very concisely, it worked for me. And that use of stock footage combined with the stuff shot specifically for the show really works. Now, they also get to the stage where the Kents find Clark in the rocket and rescue him when the blanket doesn't get scorched by the rocket because it's invulnerable material. And they show you a montage of Clark growing up and rescuing people and doing other things, and eventually becomes an adult and travels to Metropolis to become a newspaper person because that's how he can be close to any people that need saving, by getting the news before anybody else does. Got to remember, this is the 1940s. They didn't have Twitter. So he meets Jimmy Olsen, he meets Perry White, he meets Lois Lane, and the adventure starts. Now, the first one is a little careful. I think it may have been the budget that made him a little bit careful, because the main villain in this is a woman called the Spider Lady, played by Carol Foreman, who wears a domino mask and dresses like a nightclub hostess. And yet she runs this criminal enterprise. She's got a big spider web at the back of her lair, which she can electrify to electrocute people. So it's all a little bit cute there. You get the introduction of a number of the tropes from Superman. He finds out about kryptonite and finds out that kryptonite can harm him. But it plays in a manner very similar to a lot of earlier serials. The villains are basically cut from the same stock as the villains in the Batman and the Batman and Robin movie serials from the 1940s. They're kind of middle-aged guys in suits with hats and pencil mustaches. And so it doesn't give you a lot to hang on to from that science fictional aspect during the movie. But nonetheless, it works well. Now, one of the controversial aspects of Superman and Adam versus Superman is the use of animation for the flying scenes and for some of the heroic stuff. Now, originally, Sam Katzman and the production team would try to do wire work with Kirk Alyn, hooked up on wires and suspending him and moving him around on a crane to do the superhero stuff. And it just didn't work, particularly given that a lot of this stuff was filmed during the daytime around Chatsworth in California, and the wires were showing really badly. So Sam Katzman sacked all of the people who were doing the wire special effects and went with animation. And there were rotoscoped animations showing Superman flying around, rescuing people. And yes, it's quite basic rotoscoped animation, but it works. It's almost like the serials transfer from live action to comic book animation. And the animation is nowhere as good as the Max Fleischer animations were. But once you accept that, and you accept that Superman's going to be animated when he flies, and there's a lot of things where he kind of lands behind a rock, and then Kirk Alyn comes out from behind the rock, that kind of stuff. It becomes almost a drinking competition you could do. Every time Superman lands behind something and Kirk Alyn appears, you have a drink. Don't recommend you do that if you've got to drive home, but you can get quite smashed quite fast doing that, watching these serials. But I kind of like the conceit. I think that given the limitations of the time, it works quite well. And Kirk Alyn's Superman is kind of engaging. He's a cheerful character. He's not the goody two-shoes in the sense that someone like Christopher Reeve was later on. And he does have his tongue somewhat in his cheek, though not to the same fun extent that George Reeves did. The special effects work is pretty good. There's some fire effects and there's explosion effects and a number of other things that show up in the first of the two movies. And I'm going to call them movies because the series are kind of basically syncopated movies. You show a bit, you go away, you show another bit, you go away. Because I watched them that way, I'm accepting that basically they are movies in every sense. They were shown on the big screen, they were shown in cinemas, and they tell a linear narrative story. Both of the serials have the same conceit, which is basically ray guns. Ray guns are crazily popular. The Spider Lady has one which she uses to destroy things. And in the second one, the villain in Adam Man vs. Superman has a number of different devices which he uses, a number of different gimmicks. And they all play pretty well to an audience in the 1940s and 1950s. And if you let yourself go, they'll play well to you as a modern audience. So the first one is kind of basic. It's repetitive. It's real low-budget shows. But then a lot of these movie serials were like that. And it was crazily popular. It made a lot of money for Columbia Pictures. And it showed in a whole bunch of cinemas in the States, which didn't normally show serials. And so it opened a new market for Columbia. And Sam Katzman, having made them one of the cheapest of budgets, made a ton of money for the studio. And so 2 years later, they went with Adam Man vs. Superman. Now, I'm going to do a spoiler on Adam Man. Adam Man is basically Lex Luthor's secret identity because he's a criminal genius. He goes to jail. He cuts a deal with the US government to give them some of his technology and so gets freed, but he still wants to do the villainous stuff, so he creates a secret identity of Adam Man. Now, it's fairly obvious who it is. That's why it's called Adam Man vs. Superman. Lex Luthor in this one is played by Lyle Talbot, a character actor who had a long career in movies. In fact, he shows up in the extended scenes at the start of Amazon Women on the Moon, the bits that you only see in the extras on the DVD or Blu-ray of that movie. It was right at the end of his career. It may have been his last role. But Lyle Talbot was a character actor who'd been in the cinema since the 1930s and 1940s. He showed up in a number of TV series as well. He showed up in a lot of westerns. And I don't quite know whether they used bald paint or whether he shaved his head to play Lex Luthor. But he's a good, solid 1950 Lex Luthor. He's a genius. He has a whole bunch of different inventions. He's a strategic thinker as well. And he has a bunch of really cool inventions. He has various ray guns. He has a device which will create earthquakes far below the Earth. He has a rocket that will travel into outer space. He has a teleportation machine where coins made from a certain ally are the focus of the teleportation. So anybody who has the coin can be teleported by the machine at a distance. And this teleportation device is what is now known as a murdering Twinmaker. It disassembles your atoms and reassembles them at a new place. So basically it kills you there, moves all of your atoms to another place and assembles an exact duplicate of you. So it's a murdering Twinmaker. And thanks to Sean Williams for making me aware of that particular phrasing of certain kinds of teleportation devices. But of course, 1950, they didn't consider it that way. Right out of the gate, Adam Man vs. Superman does the things really well. Luthor, being the bad guy, aims one of his ray guns at a bridge. And then they cut to newsreel footage of the Tacoma Narrows bridge disaster where the bridge resonated and shook itself apart. It was a suspension bridge and it just wobbled itself apart. And they spliced the animated Superman into there to rescue. And so you see the Tacoma Narrows bridge footage, which people are fairly familiar with. And you see the animated Superman there. And Kirk Alyn's Superman braces himself at the bottom of the bridge to stop it wobbling long enough so they can get people off the bridge. I've actually been there. I went past the Tacoma Narrows on a train once in 1998. And I've seen the new bridge there, and seeing it on a Superman movie and then knowing that I'd seen it in real life was a bit of fun for me. But they go bold. Of course, the mystery starts when criminals commit crimes and then instantly vanish, and nobody knows where they go, and nobody knows that Luthor's got this teleportation device. But Luthor also has an upgraded version of this device, which he wants to use on Superman. And this device takes people to a kind of Phantom Zone-like dimension called the Empty Doom. And this is before the Phantom Zone turned up in superhero comics, in Superman comics specifically. And so you've got the movie serial basically creating the Phantom Zone for the Superman comics. At first, the device to move Superman into the Phantom Zone doesn't work, And then Luthor gets hold of some radium and some plutonium and upgrades the device, and it sends Superman into the empty doom, where he can view the world as a ghost but can't interact with it at all, until Superman finds out that if he concentrates really hard, he can make the keys on Lois Lane's typewriter move. And so he sends her a message saying, "This is Superman, I'm trapped in the empty doom. Here's what you need to do to help me." So that's kind of a nice idea. I like that one. It's the same kind of idea that played out in a lot of the George Reeves Superman TV shows, where they had this really crazy device and Superman's got to use some previously unknown power of his to manage to get through the problems that the device creates. And I like that. And Luthor's doing a whole bunch of things in this serial. He's creating a synthetic kryptonite by getting Superman to use his X-ray vision on a box of nails that has a certain alloy in it, which when they're hit with X-rays will turn into radium or plutonium, plutonium it was. So he's a very smart thinker, and he's got a whole bunch of ahead of the curve scientific knowledge and scientific instrumentation and scientific devices, which he uses to fight Superman to a standstill. He also has a flying saucer that he uses as a kind of drone to attack aeroplanes, which is kind of cool as well. The flying saucer's animated as well. By this stage, I'm kind of cool with whatever the screen wants to throw at me that's animated. Batman vs. Superman, higher production values, larger budget, obviously, because they'd made a shit ton of money on the first Superman serial. It plays a lot better, and they're getting a little bit braver, a little bit bolder on the stuff they're willing to show, leaning into the super science and the devices, and leaning into the villainy of Luthor. I kind of liked the way they did that, and when they upped the game in the second one rather than just treading water thinking they were going to make money. This second serial is vastly superior to the first one. And they even do things like they cut from the animated Superman to a tilted Kirk Alyn going like this and being heroic. So they do try a few different things to make this work. And Neill, it really settles into her Lois Lane, which is consistent with her Lois Lane as it appears in the Superman TV series as well. That kind of sarcastic and sardonic, competitive Clark Kent Lois Lane is the one we get, particularly in the second Superman serial. That I like her kind of resoluteness and her forthrightness, and the fact that she's willing to go get kidnapped by the bad guys, get escaped, and then just keeps on rolling. And in all of these serials, Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen get knocked out and captured like 87 times and get rescued by Superman. Sometimes they rescue themselves. There's a little bit of agency there. But because it's this kind of cliffhanger at the end of the episode format that the movies have, inevitably you're going to have Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen and sometimes Clark Kent captured by the bad guys and left in a trap. Sometimes it's fire, sometimes it's gas, sometimes it's a collapsing cave, sometimes it's an earthquake, sometimes it's a drone flying saucer pranging into their aeroplane. Whatever it is, there's always a cliffhanger ending with the protagonist in peril. And then you see the next episode and there's something they didn't show you in the previous episode that makes it okay. It's a lot of fun to kind of guess what the next episode is going to show us. And the way that Superman or Lois or Jimmy Olsen or whatever is going to rescue the people in peril during this episode. And the second one does some great things as well. There's a thing where Luthor destroys a dam and there's flooding and Superman's got to find a way to rescue people from the floods. It's only like a vignette almost in the middle of one of the episodes of that second serial. But they do it really well. They do it economically with the low budgets, combining the stock footage with rear projection and a bunch of other tricks, including the animation. And they really make it work. It feels like a Superman comic book in the best way. So I don't necessarily think that Kirk Alyn is the best Superman ever. I think he was a good Superman for his time. And he did the job well, and he was enthusiastic, and he was engaging, and he had a little bit of riz about him. It kind of worked in the context of this kind of movie serial. Much better in some ways than the Batman and Robin movie serials did, because the characterizations of Batman / Bruce Wayne and Robin were basic at best. Whereas because of the newspaper background, because of the work background, the characterizations of Clark Kent and Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen have a little bit more to them. in this particular pair of serials. In 1951, Lippert Pictures got the right to Superman, and they made Superman and the Mole Men, with George Reeves and Phyllis Coates playing Lois Lane. Phyllis Coates then went on to play Lois Lane in the first series of the Superman TV series before being replaced by Noel Neill for the rest of the run. And I want to leave that one to talk about in a future video, I think, because there's some interesting aspects to that one. Plays it a lot differently than the movie serials did, and plays it a lot more differently than the Max Fleischer animated ones did. This is one of the two public domain versions of the Max Fleischer animated cartoons that I've got here. And I'm waiting for the Blu-ray, and I heard that the Blu-ray has taken out some of the grain from the original footage, and I'm a little bit worried about that, but I'm going to get I've got the Blu-ray on its way. I got a good deal on it. It's like $20 for the Blu-ray. I may even rewatch some of the episodes of the Superman TV series from the 1950s, because there's some interesting stuff in those as well. I want to gauge how engaged I am with that nostalgia factor as well. But on a more modern viewpoint, I've got this one as well, the Kryptonite Collection, which is the Blu-ray of Superman the movie, Superman 2, Superman 3, Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, and Superman Returns, which for me, I'm not going to upgrade anything beyond that for those ones. Kind of like those movies, but I'm not as in love with them as I am with the earlier stuff. I think Christopher Reeve's goody-goody romantic Superman isn't quite for me. I know a lot of people love it and enjoy Christopher Reeve's version of the character, but for me, it's a little bit white bread and a little bit, playing to all of the public rather than playing to the niche of comic book geeks. And I know you had to do that at the time, and it made a lot of money, and it was fun for certain people. In retrospect, it kind of doesn't do it for me, and that's okay that it doesn't. I don't have to like everything, and I can kind of have priorities on things that I like. But revisiting these two serials was a fun experience for me. I liked what they did and how they did it on such a small budget. I like the fact that they went, just stuff it. We're going to go with the animation because that works. And the wire work didn't work. I kind of liked the fact that they did that. A lot of people and a lot of critics have criticised them for that, but for me, I can roll with it because they're doing the same thing in modern days with CGI as they did with the animation in this one. They're just doing it a lot better. And I can see a continuum from there 75 years ago. And that's stuff we're getting in modern superhero movies, including the upcoming Superman Legacy. There is a straight through line of using special effects that are available at the time the product is being made to tell a superhero story and to have a good time for the audience. Either way, they're people giving something a shot and trying to be bolder than people thought was possible. And I like that, I appreciate it, and I respect it. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. Got another video coming out on Monday my time, and I don't know what that's going to be yet, which is part of the excitement for me. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and hit the notification bell. You can also donate to the channel at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. There are some little extra bits that I put up on there occasionally, and so you can get access to them. And there are certain giveaways that I do on the channel which are available to Patreon people only. So I think I'll steer away from superhero stuff for just a little bit and do some other things because I want to keep my palate fresh. What's up, Lena? Watch some old movie serials and maybe reevaluate them in a modern context, and try not to do a YouTube video with a cat wrapped around your legs. And I'll catch you next time.